navigation, please. Blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, the source of all mercy and the God of all consolation. God comforts us in all our sorrows, that we may comfort others in their sorrows with the consolation we ourselves have received from God. We're ready for it.
Good morning, everyone. It's so nice to see all of you here in support of our families. That's very much appreciated. It's 6 down and 3 to go. I will refer to my sister Susie more often as Sue, as I knew her. It's both an honor and privilege today for me to talk to you about the life of my oldest sister, Sue. As I prepared for this, so many different thoughts and memories and stories about the family flashed through my mind. And if I overlook something today, or I miss on a date or a name, we're underway publishing a book on the life of the Dolly family, so I would be happy to accept the corrections and additions. But there's been a lot of tears of sorrow and joy, but mostly joy. Some time ago, my wife, Kathy, and I were talking, do you have more tears of joy or sorrow? And as we thought and discussed that, it seemed like we have more of joy rather than sorrow. And I think that's what we need to think about today in this successful life. Tears are okay when they come from your eyes, but if they're going down your leg, I think you got a problem. Kathy wishes she could be with you today, but I'm pleased that Cameron, Stephanie, and her husband Chuck and Carter are here as part of our children of 4. Julie could not be here as she's with our great-grandchild down in Palm Desert helping there. But let me take you back in history before Susie was born. Our mom and dad, Summer and Jenny, were an industrious young couple and very caring young people. And they were helping a neighbor farm family during the flu epidemic that had plagued our country. And some of you have read it in history. Is anybody over 92 here today? Okay, you wouldn't know that. All right. Well, Selmer helped with the farm chores for that family in Olmsted County, Minnesota. And Jenny was caring for the young children who ultimately died in her arms from the flu. This eventually became the love experience of our parents, and they were married on April 11th, 1919. This young couple was able to purchase a farm in Olmsted County, Minnesota, which is near Rochester. And Susie then was born on May 13, 1921. Happened to be a snowstorm day that late in the spring. This was a period following World War I, and crop prices were good. Over the next 15 years, 8 more children would be born in the summer to Selmer and Jenny. During this time, they were milking 12 cows, they had hogs, chickens, geese, and horses, and grew a large vegetable garden. And her father did custom combining, or actually threshing. Then tragic events began to take place. 1934 to 36, we had the drought. And as a result, many farms were lost, as was our parents. In addition to that, accounts receivable were building from the custom farm work, and our parents were not being paid. So our parents lost the farm and moved to another one, and then our father became ill and died from typhoid fever on February 12, 1936. Mother, who moved into Rochester, Minnesota with 8 children, and then 3 months later gave birth to me on March 3rd, 1936. Mother, being rather frail, suffered a mastoid infection and died there on June 8th, 1936. In Rochester, Minnesota, in the shower of the Mayo Clinic. But we didn't have penicillin, and so it was a difficult time. Now, can you visualize Sue, and what it must have been like for her with her brothers and sisters? It took on more responsibility. She moved twice, now experiencing the death of both parents and not having any idea what the future might be like. The family began to be dispersed, and she cared for me for the next 3 months while living with the social worker. Can you imagine the thoughts that must come through her mind? Will my family ever come together again? When I was 6 months old, I was adopted by the Danny Johnsons in White Bear Lake. And Sue said at that time, and I heard it from my adopted parents, that she'll always remember their faces. So wherever she traveled, she'd be looking. I gotta find my picture. Todd, when I'm crying, you're gonna laugh. To help me out. Okay. Chuck and Gordon, now deceased, went to be adopted by the Walter and Reedy Telejohn family in Forest, Wisconsin. George, deceased, and Larry went to the Martin Joyce home, and Ray was adopted by the Ed and Marty Christian family in Furley, and Roy, several years later, joined there in an adoption. Sue went on to live with Aunt Bessie Tilson in Beloit, and also there was Leona Seaver, a cousin. Catherine went to live with the Leo Lorenzen family near Deer Park, Wisconsin. The reason I'm giving you this background, because out of it came one major goal for Sue's life. And that was to get the family reunion. The first reunion, which I met some of my family, was in 1951 at Gordon's farm. At that time, under the privacy laws, and they exist today, they couldn't contact the adopted child that was not of age. But Sue was persistent that we find this little guy, now 16. And so it was Gordon and Roy who went to the Lutheran Social Service in Minneapolis and pleaded. And they finally they were allowed, the social service said, we'll give the adopted family, the Johnsons in White Bear, a number to call if they are willing to share that. And they did. And that was our first partial reunion in 1951. And we've had reunions every 3 to 5 years since that time. Now you have to remember the fact that 7 of the 9 have been in military service. 3 were on the lines in Korea. And to have us all alive and well and come together. We've really been God favored. Another very successful part of our life, and really the love of life, was a marriage to Vernon on New Year's Day, 1942. That was another snowstorm. Few people could attend the service because of the storm. And when they left on their honeymoon, they were going up 140 toward Clinton, and the last hill, they went in the ditch. And Vernon had to walk to a farm to get a phone to call into Clinton to get help on that New Year's Day to get him pulled out of the ditch. But some of the things that this meant to Sue at this point in her life, 1942, she had a partner, she had a farm, she had a home, she had a garden, and she could begin to raise 4 children. That's a joy and security. Vernon was excited too. soft-spoken guy, loving husband, who gained a high-energy, outgoing lady. He knew that she could milk cows, but in reality, she never did after marriage. Another sign of leadership developing. You understand that clearly. So often when we would join in here at Clinton and would talk to other brothers and sisters by phone or whatever, oh, we're reporting into headquarters, are we? While Vernon attended the farm, Sue focused on the children, involvement in church and 4-H clubs. Her competitive spirit in bread and pie making grew, and she entered Rock County Fair, Wisconsin State Fair, and won many ribbons. She really got known for her baking ability without formal training, but think of those years growing up and responsibility of a firstborn. They traveled together and were very active in their church. 1978, they built a new home in north of Clinton, Lyman Estates. Think back how wise they were in that preparation to buy a couple of farms as they left the main farm. Even today, Sue has had cash crops coming from 340 acres. I think she was always worried things might happen like in that Depression era. Then another separation. Vernon's death in 2010. Now it's very hard in these few moments for me to try to summarize 92 years of life as matriarch of the family. But let me give you some comments from the children. David, the oldest, said she felt, my mom felt from her experience in life, that she had to be responsible wherever she was involved. That brought about the take charge leadership. If she couldn't get projects delegated, she jumped in and did it with the grunt work herself. David said, Mom was not the huggy type, not always verbal about how she felt, but she had a gift of hospitality. She loved people, and very civic-minded. I guess a civic Christian. And as I talked to you people last night and some today, they tell me she loved everybody she met. It was happy. A real lady, wherever. For as long as I can remember, David said they had a card club and they would play 500 once a month. And then some of their members began to die away. She and Uncle George would make less every year and share it with the family at Christmas. The immediate family didn't get in on that. I don't know why she was so possessive of the less. The next in line is Charlotte, and she underlined her mother's objective was to find her brothers and sisters. Have them together, and she really never stopped worrying about us. She said, my dad, Vernon, sometimes came in second fiddle, but he seemed to understand it. What a guy. Sue's bread was the honey oat recipe, was the winner almost in all competition. Well, she built many friendships throughout the community, and these friendships are honored her in return. Probably the closest friendship, I take a risk in saying it, was Elmer and Joanne Byer. And where are you today?
They're homesick with the flu and cold this morning. Elmer called.
Oh, sorry to hear that. Well, something more for the prayers. The latter months when Sue's body began to grow weary, there were regular visitors. According to Charlotte, food was a very positive thing for Mom, but also a competitive thing. A lot of the family got different cooking and baking utensils, but she didn't. So when she needed a lefse maker, I had to borrow it. And she said I'd never brought it back. take on Mom was food and a gift of hospitality, which continues to come through so clear. She had shown her love to many. She was very caring to Dad and never lost sight of the love for each other. When Kathy and I would visit, Vernon would get rather excited. He'd say, wow, now we're going to have good food when company comes. And Sue really detested that. And Vernon would just chuckle inside and out. My sister Sue made great raspberry jam. And I love it. The raspberries came from their garden. And every fall I could expect to be favored with more than one jug. And I knew that was raining. Right there. And I knew that was special, Raymond, because you only got one. We talked a lot about Scandinavian foods, and that goes back in our family history, because our father liked to cook Norwegian meals, and our mother liked to cook Danish. One thing I never learned to taste was the fish balls. Every time I would call before coming to Clinton, I'd say, Sue, what can I bring you? And she'd say, go over to Ingebrigtsen's in Minneapolis and pick up fish balls. Well, how many cans? Well, 6 to 12. Well, so we would do that, and so one day I just said, why don't you prepare some for me, because I just don't know what this is all about. And she did, and it isn't very exciting. It's nowhere near lutefisk, which I love. Well, anyway, or Minnesota walleye. I learned early on if I was going to visit with Sue and Vernon, it's a good idea to call ahead. Then you knew something special would be coming out of the oven, and that was just great. Dwayne remembers when Sue was a reporter for the Beloit Daily newspaper representing Bergen Township. Susie would always send information into the Clinton Tomper as well. Mom, according here to Dwayne, she worked for Rock County, educating families on nutrition. She was always at a time where she worked, she also had a little bit of a time she worked for many department store in Beloit. I understand that's now gone. Their travels took them to Mexico, Hawaii, Florida, Arizona, Jamaica, and California. Mom was always on the go, whether it was day or night, and even up to about a week and a half before her death, she was on the go. And now for the pumpkin patch, Dennis, the youngest of the siblings. Mom was a very loving person, caring, a great cook, and always concerned for her family, which would mean my dad never got excited when she seemed to focus more on her brothers than he. She was well known for her counseling role and nutrition through the Extension Service in Rock County. Today I hear from people, this is Dennis now, whether he's at the dealership or at the farm, or people will say, you taught me how to cook. Just proud of Mom. Dennis continued that when all of the family was found, she was most happy, a feeling of relief, joy, and success. Our brother Larry, now 87, Mesa, Arizona, for health reasons, couldn't be with us today. But he commented, my sister was outstanding. She was very special in every way, to her husband, to her family, and to her community. And now from Ray, who's one short of raspberry jam per year. And with Ray today is Todd and Carl from their fertile Minnesota family. Ray stayed and worked on the farm one summer. He remembers getting up at 4 in the morning to feed cattle. Breakfast would be served at 8. He remembers Sue working so hard to find all of us kids, and she was a strong-willed lady who always took charge. But Ray looks back at her life and says, it's a success story. Sue was confident, purpose-driven. She loved her church, and if she was able to be with us today, she would be directing traffic downstairs for the lunch, probably even rearranging the buffet. Well, that's Sue. But she also finds something positive in every experience. Our last reunion in 2011 in Turtle Lake, Wisconsin, she suffered a heart attack and had to be airlifted into the Clare Hospital. She looked back on that and said, well, my She recovered surprisingly well. Then, in a soft, tender way, Jesus began calling her home. At first, I didn't think she wanted to go. I think for a while she thought she could live forever, but her body was getting weak and weary. On the afternoon of October 25 of 2015, she accepted the transition into God's long-term plan. Over the last several years, home health care has been provided by Irene International out of Chicago. While it has expanded our geography lessons, 3 of these special gentle caregivers came from Mongolia, Asia. Now visualize again with me this reuniting of family. Meeting in heaven, Vernon might say, what took you so? Our mom and dad, who had lived a very short life on earth, under 40, were delighted. Catherine, Chuck, George, Gordon, and Roy stood together with joyful hugs. This Pastor Tom has served this church 17 years. That was the length of a marriage of our mom and dad. Now the tears can be for joy again, because there's no suffering for Grandma, Mom and Dad, sisters and brothers, Grandpa and Grandma, and all you young people. I think you need to realize she was a great example for all of us. Thanks for sharing your life with us. A loving